The shocking betrayal. A family decision. It was a quiet Sunday evening when I received the call that would change everything. It wasn't an emergency. Nothing dramatic, but it would still hit harder than anything I'd ever anticipated. My parents invited me over for dinner. Nothing unusual there. Right, I was expecting the usual warmth, maybe a few laughs, and some of Mom's famous homemade lasagna. But when I walked into that house, everything seemed different. The smell of garlic and marinara that usually filled the air felt hollow, almost suffocating. I could sense something was off. Liam and Leona, my younger twin siblings, were already sitting at the dining table, grinning at me in a way that didn't quite sit right. It wasn't their usual cheerful faces. This was something else. And my parents, Mom and Dad, sitting there, so composed, staring at me, like they had rehearsed this moment for days. As I sat down, my stomach twisted. The lasagna, which I was sure would be the highlight of the evening, suddenly seemed like a distant memory, its weight almost unbearable. I should have known something was up. Parents don't call you over just to share a family recipe, especially when it's not even your birthday. But what happened next took me by complete surprise. Without any preamble, without a word of comfort, Liam leaned forward, a smug grin playing on his face. He didn't even flinch as he delivered the bombshell. "We wanted you to know now, Sarah," he said, his tone oozing with arrogance. "Everything goes to us. The house, the lake cottage, all of it. All of it is ours." My heart stopped. I sat there frozen, my mind racing, trying to process his words. It felt like a sucker punch to the gut. Suddenly, the lasagna on my plate, the one Mom promised would bring me home, felt like a stone in my stomach. My head spun, and the distant hum of the city outside seemed to fade away, as if everything in that room was suspended in time. My voice shook as I responded. "Excuse me, what do you mean?" "Everything." Liam's grin only widened. Leona, sitting next to him, exchanged a look with him. This look of triumph that made my skin crawl. And then my mom. Her smile had faded, her usual warmth replaced by a steely resolve. "Spoke up, Sarah," she began, her voice sharp, cutting through the awkward silence. "Your father and I have made our decision, and we want you to hear it directly from us. Everything, from the house to the lake cottage, is going to Liam and Leona." My gaze darted over to my dad, hoping for some sign of hesitation, some indication that this was all just a cruel joke. But no, his gaze was fixed on the silverware in front of him, his hands folded neatly. He didn't even look up. It was as if I didn't even exist in that moment. For a second, I was convinced I had misheard. But no, the words hung in the air like an anchor, pulling me deeper into disbelief. I turned to my dad, but his silence spoke volumes. And then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke quietly. "Sarah," he said, his voice carefully measured, "you've done well for yourself. Your mother and I are proud of you, of your career, and your success. But Liam and Leona, they're still finding their footing. They need more support. Years of sacrifice, the weight of responsibility." I blinked hard, trying to push the tears that threatened to spill. Support. The word echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. For years, I had been the one silently bearing the financial burden for this family. Every house payment, every tuition fee for Liam, every whim of Leona's costly hobbies, all of it had been covered by me. I did it quietly, without complaint, because I believed in the idea of family. I believed that my sacrifices meant something. But now, here I was, hearing my parents justify it all. Justify why they chose to leave everything to the twins. Because they needed more support. My heart twisted bitterly. "So, this is my reward," I demanded, my voice trembling, but still strong enough to cut through the tension. I spent 4 years paying your mortgage, covering Liam's tuition changes, paying for Leona's endless hobbies. And now you tell me that because I've made something of myself, I'm left with nothing. Is that it? My mother sighed dramatically, shaking her head as if I were the one who had done something wrong. This is exactly why we didn't want to tell you, Sarah, she said, her voice laced with frustration. You always bring it back to money. It's never about family with you. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, anger bubbling beneath the surface. It was always about family for me. I shot back. Every single sacrifice I've made was for the family. Because you asked. Mom, because you said family sticks together. Liam, ever the smug one, leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He scoffed. You're acting like some martyr. Nobody forced you to help. You just liked playing the hero. Leona giggled quietly, twirling a strand of her glossy hair. Her eyes narrowed with amusement. Maybe you thought if you threw enough money at us, Mom and Dad would finally love you as much as they love Her words cut deep. It was like a dagger, aimed right at my heart. The sting was sharp, reopening a wound I had tried to forget. I had spent years trying to earn their love, their approval, believing that if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, they would see me. But now it was clear none of it mattered. I could feel the anger rising in me. But more than that, I felt the weight of betrayal. My parents had always indulged. Liam and Leona excused their very irresponsible choices. And now here I was, the one who had supported them, painted as the villain. The irony was suffocating. I looked at my parents. No one said anything. They just sat there, silent and unmoving, as if the pain they had caused me didn't even matter. It took everything in me to hold back the tears, to steady myself in that moment. But I knew then I was done. Done being their ATM, done being the one who carried the weight of their mistakes. It was time to walk away. You're right, Liam, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady, to remain calm. Nobody forced me to help. But from now on, nobody gets to guilt me into being this family's financial crutch. I'm done. I stood up abruptly, pushing my chair back. The surprised looks on their faces were almost satisfying. But the pain, the humiliation, that would stay with me long after I left. As I grabbed my coat, the familiar scent of marinara and baked garlic lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of what I had hoped would be a simple family dinner. Instead, it had turned into an ambush that made me feel small, insignificant, and utterly rejected. The front door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my ears. For a moment, I stood on the doorstep, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The cold Portland air hit my face, cutting through the fog of disbelief. But my heart still felt raw. I had just been kicked out of my own family. And for what? For making something of myself. For having the audacity to build a life they couldn't control. The struggle, confronting years of silent sacrifice. As I stepped out into the night, the weight of the world seemed to press down on me. I had always believed that family was everything, that love and loyalty meant something, that sacrifice would eventually be recognized. But now, as the cool Portland air hit my face, I felt more isolated than ever. It wasn't just the money, the assets, or the things I had helped them secure over the years. No, it was the emotional toll that came with it all, the quiet promises I had kept, the endless nights spent sacrificing my own happiness for theirs. I had supported them for so long, believing that one day it would all matter, that they would appreciate what I had done. But all those late nights, those long hours spent juggling finances, handling bills, and stepping in when no one else would, it hadn't mattered. It wasn't enough. And now I was left standing in the street, questioning everything. Was I wrong to expect something in return? To think that my parents, the people I had always trusted, would see me as more than just a resource. I didn't know anymore. But one thing was clear. I could no longer be their financial savior. The next few days were a blur of silence and emptiness. The phone calls came. But I ignored them. My parents, Liam, and Leona, they all tried to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Every call, every voicemail was another reminder of how little they truly understood me. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect. It was about feeling valued. I thought about the years I had spent catering to their needs, the countless weekends I had sacrificed, the vacations I had given up to cover bills, the friendships I had neglected. Because I was too busy making sure everyone else was comfortable. I had been so wrapped up in the idea of family that I had neglected my own needs, my own life. And now, standing in the quiet of my apartment, I felt like I had lost everything. Not just my family's approval, but my own sense of self-worth. But even in the midst of the pain, there was a small spark, a flicker of realization that perhaps this was the moment I had needed all along. A moment to let go, to choose myself. I didn't want to stay stuck in this cycle of guilt and obligation. I was done being the family's ATM, done carrying their burdens. And for the first time, I realized that my worth wasn't tied to how much I could give, how much I could sacrifice. I wasn't their bank account, their personal credit line. I was Sarah. And it was time to start living for myself. But it wasn't easy. The calls didn't stop. They became more desperate, more insistent. Mom left voicemails begging me to come back, to fix things. Liam and Leona sent angry messages, accusing me of being selfish and greedy. And my dad, he was quieter, but no less forceful. They all tried to guilt me, to make me feel like the villain in this story. And I almost caved. I almost picked up the phone. But then I remembered everything. The years of giving, of sacrificing, of being treated like I was disposable. It hit me hard. I wasn't the one in the wrong here. They were. I finally reached a decision. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into that toxic cycle. I blocked their numbers, one by one. I needed space. I needed time. I needed to heal. And I wasn't going to let them pull me back into the place where I had felt so invisible, so unimportant. Reclaiming my life, the moment of liberation. 3 weeks passed without direct contact from my family. The silence was deafening at first, but soon it became a kind of peace for the first time in years. I wasn't constantly worried about paying bills for others, managing their lives, or wondering what they would demand from me next. It was just me, and while the loneliness sometimes crept in, it wasn't the same kind of loneliness I had felt when I was surrounded by my family. This was a different kind of quiet, one that was freeing. I threw myself into my work. The latest project at Bennett Construction, a medical office complex in Sacramento, was demanding. But it was exactly what I needed. It kept my mind busy, kept me focused on something other than the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I was good at what I did. I had always been good at my job. But now it felt different. Now it felt like I was working for me, not for anyone else. Every meeting, every blueprint, every client walked through, these were moments that were mine alone. But even in the whirlwind of work, I couldn't escape the nagging thought that my family wasn't finished with me yet. I knew the calls would eventually come. And sure enough, a few weeks later, my phone buzzed with a message from Liam. Family meeting tonight. You owe it to us to be there. My heart raced as I stared at the text, the anger bubbling up again. I had made my choice. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to be manipulated into returning to the place where I had always been treated like an ATM. But there was still that tiny part of me that wondered if they would finally see reason, if they would finally realize how much they had hurt me. I couldn't resist. I replied simply, "Fine." That night, I drove to my parents' house, feeling a sense of dread settle over me as I approached the familiar driveway. Liam's motorcycle and Leona's flashy blue Kia were already there, parked side by side like two symbols of entitlement. My stomach churned as I stepped out of my car, each step toward the front door feeling heavier than the last. Mom opened the door, her smile forced, barely masking her irritation. "Sarah, glad you decided to come," she said, her tone stiff and distant. "Daisy's here, too. Aunt Daisy." Her presence surprised me. She rarely got involved in family conflicts. But tonight, she was there, sitting quietly in the corner. Her eyes filled with sympathy. As I sat down across from her, my heart began to race. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was a battle. Dad cleared his throat. "We called this meeting to clear the air." He began, his voice stern and as in resolute. "Sarah, we thought you'd see reason by now. Obviously, we were mistaken." I didn't even try to hide my disbelief. "See reason after everything I've done for you, after paying your mortgage, covering Liam's tuition, fixing up the lake cottage. You're telling me I should just accept that all of that means nothing?" Mom cut in, rolling her eyes. "You helped, sure, but it was your responsibility as the oldest." Liam scoffed. "We never asked for your charity." "Sarah, stop playing the victim." Liana sneered. "Maybe if you weren't so busy trying to save us, you'd have your own life by now." The insults, the accusations, they hit me like a ton of bricks. But this time, I wasn't going to let them break me. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a loud scrape. "You know what?" I said, my voice steady, despite the storm of emotions inside of me. You're right. It was my mistake to believe I mattered here. But I won't make that mistake again." As I reached the door, Dad's voice called out sharply behind me, but I didn't turn around. "If you walk out now, Sarah, don't expect to be welcome back." I paused at the door, my hand gripping the knob. "That's fine," I said, my voice icy with fury. I've never felt welcome here anyway, embracing freedom, rebuilding my life on my terms. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that rang in my ears. The weight of my family's betrayal hung heavy in the air. But as I stepped into the cold night, something shifted inside me. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of liberation. The heavy burden that had been placed on my shoulders was gone, and while the pain of their rejection stung, there was something freeing about walking away. I climbed into my car, my heart still pounding from the confrontation. As I drove through the quiet streets of Portland, my mind replayed the events of the evening, the hurtful words, the smug expressions on my siblings' faces, and most of all, the hollow silence from my parents. They didn't care. They never had. But then, something else happened. A realization that had been slowly forming in my mind. For the first time, I was free. Free from the guilt, free from the constant expectations, free from being a tool for their financial convenience. I wasn't their ATM anymore. I was me, and that was more than enough. The next few days were quiet. I took a few days off from work, focusing on what I needed to do to move forward. I started looking at my life from a new perspective. One that didn't involve endless sacrifices for people who wouldn't even acknowledge them. I began to see the beauty of taking care of myself, of putting my own needs and desires first. I had been so focused on pleasing my family, on living up to their expectations, that I had forgotten how to live for myself. The silence from my family was almost unbearable at first. The calls, the messages, the angry voicemails, they kept coming. My mother's voice was full of guilt, accusing me of tearing the family apart. But this time, I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't listen to their manipulations. I had made my choice, and I wasn't going to let them pull me back into their world of control and guilt. It wasn't easy. The loneliness was hard to bear. But as the weeks passed, I began to heal. I poured myself into my work, and for the first time, it felt like my success was truly mine. The promotions, the recognition, the respect I had earned at Bennett Construction. It was all mine, and it felt good. No more covering for anyone else. No more sacrificing my time. My money, my happiness for a family that didn't appreciate it. I also started to do things I had put off for years, things I had sacrificed for their sake. I took a trip to Italy, something I had dreamed of for so long, but never allowed myself to do, standing on a balcony in Florence. Watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. This was the life I had been missing. A life where I didn't have to constantly give and give and give without receiving anything in return. A life where I could just be. And then something incredible happened. I started to rebuild, not just my career, but my life. I joined a hiking group, something I had always wanted to do, but had never had the time for. Through that group, I met Alex, a kind, thoughtful man whose quiet support helped me heal in ways I hadn't anticipated. He wasn't like my family. He didn't see me as someone to exploit. He saw me for who I was, a person deserving of respect, of love, of happiness. Over time, the wounds from my family's betrayal began to heal. The silence from them became less oppressive, and I began to find peace. But as much as I wanted to move on, the rumors started. Aunt Daisy called me one night, her voice filled with urgency. "Sarah, your mom's been telling everyone you abandoned them. She's saying you're trying to make your parents homeless." I couldn't believe it. But I also wasn't surprised. My parents had always rewritten history to suit their narrative. They painted me as the villain because they couldn't face their own mistakes. The guilt they were trying to place on me was just another way to control me. But this time, I wasn't falling for it. Instead, I decided to take control of the narrative. I wrote a post on Facebook explaining everything. The mortgage payments, the tuition fees, the lake cottage renovation. I shared the truth of everything I had done for my family and how I had been treated in return. I laid bare the pain I had endured, the sacrifices I had made, and the realization that I was no longer going to be their financial crutch. The reactions were mixed. Some people expressed their support and sympathy, while others scolded me for airing private family matters. But for the first time, I didn't care. The truth was out there, and it felt good to no longer be the silent one, hiding in the shadows. My mother called me, furious. "How dare you humiliate us like this?" she yelled. "You have no right." But I didn't flinch. "I have every right," I replied coldly. "I've been your ATM for years. You didn't care about me, and now you want to act like I'm the bad one." The calls kept coming, but this time I didn't pick up. Instead, I blocked them. The only person who had remained steady by my side was Aunt Daisy. She had always believed in me, even when my own family didn't. And as I sat with her one evening, she said something that stuck with me. "Family isn't about blood, sweetheart. It's about who truly sees your worth." Those words stuck with me. They changed everything. Say, moving on, embracing a new future. Months passed, and my life slowly began to take shape. My family's toxic influence had finally faded from my everyday reality. I focused on my career, where I continued to thrive. The weight of their betrayal no longer weighed me down. I had found freedom, not just financial freedom, but emotional freedom. I wasn't tied to their expectations anymore. I wasn't burdened by their manipulations. In the following months, my life began to blossom. I moved forward, truly forward. I had the chance to enjoy my life without feeling guilty for taking time for myself. I finally understood that my worth wasn't determined by what I could give to others, but by how I saw myself. I had reclaimed my life. The last thing I heard from my family came in the form of a bitter text from Liana. Thanks a lot. Everyone hates us now. I hope you're proud. And you know what? I was proud. Proud of myself for walking away, for standing up for who I was, and for finally choosing to live for me. Now, my life is my own, and I don't need anyone else's approval to be happy.